Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning in America or whatever time it is. I just want to welcome you to another episode of Rant and Pray. I'm your host, Maureen Hamblin, and I am joined by the wonderful Claudia Marion Allen. Thank you for coming on the show.
It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yo, if you've never heard of this girl, you don't even know like what we've got today. I was just telling her that I've been stalking her on all her stuff. You just started a YouTube channel because everybody wanted your content, your sermons, your everything.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so tell us a bit about yourself.
Man, so it's like, where do I start? Where do I go? I consider myself to be a writer, a thinker. I particularly like thinking and writing about race and racism and biblical social justice. And I like to be engaged in activism, particularly the rights of Black Americans. But also I am very much so also passionate about like Indigenous rights as well as Asian rights and Latino rights, and really just feel like all of humanity has value.
Yeah.
And, regardless of nationality, race, color, creed, we all should be treated as equals, and we all should have the same opportunities to access resources and the like. And so I kind of spend the majority of my time doing that. In the church, out the church, whatever the platform, academia, preaching, whatever it is. That's kind of what my work is and kind of who I am.
Yeah, it's amazing. So like, tell us a bit about your background and, what you've studied as well, things like that. Because I think that's really interesting.
Sure. So my degrees are in English literature. I specialize in African American literature. My background, I would say I'm Black American. I'm born here in the States. My parents are born here in the States. My grandparents were born here in the States. Literally, I think if it goes back, our ancestors were enslaved. And so my particular lineage doesn't have any voluntary immigration to this country. And so that brings with it, a very interesting history, knowing that, there are some family that I have no contact with just by virtue of not knowing their names and not being able to find them because there are no records. And, others have passed away. And so I think that there is, in being Black American, there's like this lived experience of like this hyphen. Where it's like you're African and American, but technically you're neither of those things.
Right.
And kind of being germane to the States also complicates that. It's like, I know that there is white Jewish blood in me. I know that there is Native American blood in me. I know there is African blood in me, but I don't know which tribe in Africa. I have, so it's like you're kind of living this, it's like, who you are, but you really don't. That actually kind of got, I'd say, particularly spotlighted when I was a kid. I went to a Christian elementary school, and it was predominantly white. And every year we would do these like multicultural fairs, and like the kids would have to be in this choir and sing songs, and everybody had to dress up as who they are, or like their family history, their ancestry, their heritage, right? And so my mom, my family's from Chicago, so my mom was like, all right, bet you about to wear a nice Sabbath dress. Like they're gonna get this good Sabbath dress. And then so I went, I sang, in the little choir, and the music teacher was like, Claudia, where is your garb? I was like, I'm in it. I'm in it, sis. She was like, no, like, where are your people from? And I'm telling you, I think I was maybe 9 or maybe 10, right? And I was like, from Chicago. And she was like, grandparents, Detroit. Another grandparent, Georgia. Before that, Georgia. Before that, though, the Mayflower. Like, I don't know what you're asking me. And I remember having to kind of go back and like tell my mom, like, yo, miss, this music teacher is not, she feels like I'm not participating, and she's gonna like dock me. I was like, yo, you need to give me some garb, you need to give me some ethnic something to put on.
What kind of outfit?
It really got to, and like every year it was an issue with her. Like, until I graduated from like 8th grade, every single year it was an issue. Claudia, you need to put on something ethnic. To the point where there were years that I put on the ethnic clothes of other individuals. Like I wore like a Japanese outfit, or I would wear they would find some kind of an ethnic costume for me to put on, right? And I just think that that's always very fascinating for me. That always kind of stands out for me in the sense that my ethnicity, my Blackness here in the States is not recognized. And white people often have a tendency to not feel comfortable with acknowledging that my lack of connection to the continent is your fault.
Yeah.
And so you want to put me in something that is not even authentic to me, because you are kind of exceptionalizing and exoticizing ethnicity at this point, really, for your fare. And so that kind of, I don't think that it did any damage, but it definitely, it put a stamp, growing up in a community like that, where, Black History Month is like a one chapel assembly, or
if you're lucky.
If you're lucky, right? So that, I felt growing up that I was in constant positions of challenging, like, no, this is not okay. Like, this is my Blackness. I'm going to express my Blackness this authentic way. Or, no, we're going to celebrate Black History Month all month. Or, in high school, it's like, no, we're going to do this for a week straight, it's just very, how do I say, I was constantly a troubler in Israel.
And a good one at that. I think we need people like you, people who are pioneers, trailblazers, who kind of are able to spot the problem and say, okay, I'm gonna be the change. But talking about belonging, when I lived in America, so I'm Kenyan, and then spent most of my life in Dublin, Ireland, and now I'm living in Belfast, Northern Ireland. But I went to Andrews to do my MDiv, and I remember my heart being so broken, because as an African, it had never hit me just how African Americans or Black Americans, some of them really struggle with that idea of belonging. You're not American, you're not African. And especially when people want to label, just put African on you, and you're kind of like, I have no connection to Africa at all. Like, if anything happened, I know I can go back to Kenya. So it hit me when I was there that you guys have nowhere to go back to. Do you know what I mean? And that, absolutely. And I remember crying. I'm a crier, so I cried, and and I gave all my African outfits. I don't know. I think I felt I had to. I don't know. Maybe it's some white guilt. Evan Willis told me, "I free you from white guilt." But I gave
free yourself, Maureen. Free yourself.
So it kind of felt I needed to kind of, there were some girls who really liked my African outfits, so I would give them that. Just, I don't know, a part of me just felt like, the only reason I'm not in that situation is because my family didn't get, taken away, or my ancestry. So I have a deep burden for African and Black American people. Not even sure what I can do in the future, but it does, like, I'm really passionate about it. So it's nice to see another woman who is African. Which one do you prefer? Black American? Because I know some people have an issue.
So I actually don't have,
Okay.
I'm not bothered by it. You know,
Okay.
I identify as African American.
Okay.
I'll say African American or Black American. It doesn't have any like negative connotation to me, though I do know that some people, feel a way. I think it just more so comes down to when I try to explain different things to people, and I have so many close friends that are Caribbean American or are African American, as in Caribbean immigrants and African immigrants. I often, in trying to explain, I'll say like Black American, so that I can acknowledge, or I'll say, if I'm talking about someone, I'll identify them as Nigerian American or Ghanaian American or Kenyan American. To just because it gets confusing after a while, even for the white people. I got it. They're just like, I don't,
especially for the white people.
Like Haitian American, Trini American. It just, the hyphen life is, it's fascinating. And I think that America being such a race-based country, a country that really needs these kinds of categorizations, is the only reason why this problem exists.
Because I often say that, well, I guess I feel like I spent a lot of my years trying not to be Black because I was in such a white country, right? And then I get to America and I was really Black, and I found my Blackness, for better or for worse. I'm glad I found it, but it's a real thing. And I remember when Tim and I, my husband, who is very Irish, showed up at a church near Andrews, not going to say the name, and it was our first Saturday there. So we show up at this church and they're like, oh, so where are you visiting from? And we're both like, Ireland, because like, I'm not going to tell you my history, right,
like,
you
can't get the,
like, I just met you. So
nobody has time for that.
My husband and says, you're from Ireland, but where's she from? That was my first experience in America. And so you're right, it's like there's this need for these categories and Blackness and whiteness, and within Blackness then there are all these divisions, and even what really stood out for me was how Caribbean and African immigrants don't see the Black struggle in America. Not all of them, but I met quite a huge group of people that don't see it. And have you experienced that?
I have experienced that. I think that there's a lot of intra-racism between or within the diaspora, right? And so I think that what ends up happening is several Caribbean and African immigrants kind of come to the country, and really, you're good. Hey, friend. Hello.
He just woke up from his nap.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. And so what ends up happening is there's a lot of tension, right? And so it goes both ways, right? I won't be the African American to come on and just cry about all the Caribbean and African immigrants, all the bad that they've done or what have you, right? To the neglect of the reality that Black Americans have also expressed hateful rhetoric and ill treatment toward those individuals as well, right? I also kind of have to start out with saying really our Black Americans have even at times kind of written Caribbean and African immigrants out of our Black history, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
that what ends up happening is, you know, you hear about individuals like James Baldwin or Malcolm X or W.E.B. Du Bois, and these people are identified as Black American heroes, and they are.
Yeah.
But it's like somebody's mother was from Barbados, and then somebody's father was from Jamaica, and somebody's mother was from Haiti, and you know, so like I just say that to say that Black American history is a diasporic history that includes Caribbean immigrants, that includes African immigrants, and we need to do a better job of kind of acknowledging that. That said, there are several Caribbean immigrants, African immigrants that really don't understand the struggle. Mm-hmm. And in conversation with many of them, I have come to learn that it's for a variety of reasons, right? When you come from a country and all of the people in power look like you, then you don't conceptualize why the Black people in another country can't hold power, or why they can't exercise some kind of overtake. Right. And so I think that what ends up happening is that colonialism expressed in the States is a much different expression of colonialism. It was a much different expression of colonialism than in the Caribbean or on the continent. What oftentimes happened in the Caribbean and on the continent was Europeans would come and only a select few would stay on the continent, but they would manipulate various peoples in the country, elevate some, denigrate others, create this kind of infighting so that various hierarchies could be maintained, but they did not stay there long term in large groups. Versus in the States, we're actively living with them. Like they didn't go anywhere. And so what ends up happening is you bring millions of African people to a country, you enslave them, and then you have the Civil War, and now everybody's free. And so now everybody is cohabitating. And that it has created and has not ceased to create problems. Because you've got Black people cohabitating with white people that never saw them, never wanted them to have any kind of equal footing in society. And so it's segregation, it's Jim Crow, it's lynching, it's police brutality, it's redlining, it's you can't get a job, you know. So it's like so many things from the Civil War to the present is white America's retaliation and frustration that Black people cannot be their slaves anymore. And when you are systematically working to keep a people down that you absolutely do not respect, then I, as a person, actually do not have the space or opportunity to really combat that in the same way that, let's say, the Haitians did against the French, you know, in Hispaniola, quite frankly, right? So that, you know, if there's only so many Frenchmen, then, and you guys wage war, basically, you call a full-on country revolt, right? Then that is a much different conversation. And then on top of that, you know, you also have to think, I think Caribbeans don't think about this from the standpoint of, like one Caribbean country, right, might be the size of like half of a state. Right? Like that's not even we're one whole country, and you could fit probably all of the Caribbean in Texas. Right? In terms of square footage. And so I think that like when you even think about that, it's like geography, how islands are set up and structured, that might permit or better allow revolt. You know, there are just so many reasons why I think Caribbean islands and the oppressed peoples there were in better positions to really revolt against their oppressors and take back full control. But the fact of the matter is that even in Caribbean islands, there is huge residue of colonialism. While they might have removed certain bodies, and I know this happens on the continent of Africa as well, while you may have been able to remove white bodies out of your country, you are still dealing with economic ramifications, psychological ramifications that prevent you from actively being able to really thrive and flourish in your country. And so oftentimes it's like this lack of knowledge. You now have these Africans and these Caribbeans that come to the States with this, well, I'm better than you mindset because of 1804. And I'm better than you because we have our independence, and Black Americans haven't gotten independence. It's like, we're in two completely different political setups that just flat out does not permit Black Americans to do in the States what oppressed Africans have been able to do, like in the Caribbean or even in their various countries on the continent. So
I agree.
It's deep, it's frustrating, but I think that if we ever get to a point where we can have a better understanding of each other's history and really how white supremacy infiltrated each of our locations in very different ways, I think that we'll be better off. I mean, I didn't even get to the the Afro-Latino conversation down in Brazil and in South America. Like, that's a whole other situation too.
Yeah, I agree. And recently an African person on their Facebook wrote that, colonialism in Africa was worse than slavery, or the effects of it. And I was just like, you can't even compare the two. Like, it makes no sense to compare the two. And, they ranted on about something, and I was just like, let's agree to disagree, because the two cannot be compared. Because, like, I know, like, my grandmother fought in the Kenyan War of Independence, called the Mau Mau. So she was out with their guns and the medicine bag and whatever, and they were able to do guerrilla type of war, where they hid in the forest and attacked the white man and all that kind of thing. But they, it would be impossible for you guys to do that because of the size, the numbers of the people, the fact that you are on someone else's continent as well. Do you know what I mean? There's just so many factors. But I think evil is evil, so they're both bad. Colonialism and slavery, both bad, both oppression, and both have affected the mental state of Black people for centuries, so much so to a point that a lot of us don't even believe in ourselves. We don't think we're good enough. We don't think we're able to accomplish certain things. But what I really admire about you is that you seem to kind of have always known your value, your identity, and I think that drove you to kind of fight for things. For example, you set up that minor in African studies.
Oh, wow.
At Andrews.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Man, Maureen has really been stalking me, guys. Yeah, no, just to what you were saying, I don't like to compare oppressions either. Right? People always ask, which was worse, the Holocaust or American slavery? And it's just like, I mean, should we even have this conversation, right? People always fail to talk about the genocide of the African people on the continent by Leopold. That was 15 million plus Africans just killed. And so the genocide of Black peoples and others just under white supremacy has been going on for some time. And so I think that rather than kind of trying to figure out who had it worse, I think that, all of us should just kind of maybe like focus our attention on the problem. And really begin to kind of come together and say, hey, not all, the issue is white supremacy. And in America, you mentioned that, you guys are from Ireland, right? The Irish were not well received in the beginning of American history at all. They were not considered white. Italians were not considered white. Jews were not considered white. These individuals, the Italians, the Jews, and the Irish, Irish people were enslaved here in the States, experienced all sorts of violence and oppression against them for being Catholic. And so I think that there's just a lot of history there that really needs to get to the crux of white British or British European whiteness. That seems to be the main problem, or at least the generator of many global racial problems. And once it got to the point where we now need to have a conversation about enslavement for global expansion, now we would rather use Black and brown bodies to do that. And so that means that I need to receive Irish, receive Italian, receive Jewish bodies into the cloud of whiteness. And so now we're not going to treat you the way we used to treat you, because we need to come together as a white collective to mistreat Black people. That's what it is. And so, yes, I think to the other point that you made about me kind of always knowing, man, that's so true. People always ask me all the time, they're like, Claudia, when did you know that you were Black? I'm like, y'all, a better question is, when did you not know you were Black? The answer to that would probably be at conception. Like, I really cannot think of a time when I had some kind of like epiphany moment. You know, like I've heard of stories of some people who will, like, they'll get to school and like they'll take a school picture, and then they'll be like the only Black person in the picture, and then they see the picture and it's like, oh, I didn't know I was Black. Now that I see myself in the picture, I see that I'm Black. That has never been, even before getting to school, I knew I was Black, Maureen. Okay. So I'm gonna have to go ahead and give that one to my parents. They were very clear and explicit about who I was, where I was from, where my family was from, and some of the things that have happened to various, family members. So yeah, I never didn't know that I was Black. And so when you grow up with that, I also grew up in a house with a lot of Black art, a lot of Black books, paintings of Black people by Black people. I grew up listening to a lot of Black music. Like my home was a very explicitly and overt Black place. There were books there that, the 100 African American firsts, or like, just books like that. Like, who was the first Black congressman? Who was the first Black senator? And who was the first Black baseball player and the first Black basketball player, like different things like that, like books that, really kind of, explained and detailed all of that stuff. Now, I don't feel as though my parents indoctrinated me in the work of protest. So we weren't like at the house and they were just like, we must defeat the white man. This is the agenda for how we're going to do it. Claudia, you must get a degree. And you know what I mean? Like, it really wasn't like that. Like, everybody, my mother was a nurse. She taught nursing. My father was an accountant. They lived very ordinary lives. And here I am. My brother and I are, for a long time, we were like stark opposites, because his best friend is white. His close friends are white. They've been best friends since like first grade. Like, his little cohort of friends, like, man, they've literally been friends for like 20 years. And that's like mind blowing in and of itself. But growing up, I was from infancy, I was, this is what it is. I would go to school only playing with the Black kids, only only sitting with the Black kids at lunch, only singing in the Black choir. Like that's, it was very overt. It was very explicit. My brother, on the other hand, was not there. He was not on that tip. He was living his life, just like, yo, Claudia, like, okay, like, whatever. Yeah.
So where
now, as adults, you know, we're really on the same page. You know, he does a lot of community work, you know, working with young kids in Baltimore, in Benton Harbor. So, you know, I think that once, you know, we both got to high school, college, I think that we both gained a greater understanding of what was going on in society. And then, you know, he majored in history in college, particularly American history. And so, you know, he's just an expert in racism and how it has expressed itself in this country for years. So I think that now we just, you know, but even in our approaches to dealing with the fight, we fight differently, right? And I think that just goes to show that this kind of work is Holy Spirit inspired, and it's not something that like our parents like sat us down and like indoctrinated us and forced us to do. You know, we were living, you know, our ordinary Black life. You know, like I was saying, you know, my mother has Black figurines, you know, on mantles and different things like that. And so it's like when you kind of grow up in like an incubator like that, it really settles and grounds your identity. So that I never grew up feeling like, oh, I'm just American. Like I never thought that. I always knew that I am a part of a people with a troubled history. And I'm a part of a people who are constantly fighting for just to be acknowledged as human. And when you kind of have that backstory, that back narrative, and you have that grounding, you just approach every single thing that you do in life much differently. And that's really what led me to the African American Studies minor at Andrews.
Did you get a lot of pushback, or was it easy enough? Or
I don't think that there was pushback. You know, it was a undergraduate leadership program project, right? So I went and I spoke to my then chair of the English department, Dr. Doug Jones, and I was like, hey, Dr. Jones, you know, I really want to create an English, like a survey in African American literature. And I would like for it to kind of be a mandatory class that every English major has to take before they graduate, right? Because so much in English curriculum and English departments, Adventist or not, is extremely whitewashed. So that, you know, at any level from undergraduate up to doctoral, you know, you can have your degree and maybe touch one or two Black texts. But I actually can't do that. So I can't come into an English department, say I want to specialize in African American literature and then only touch Black texts. Whereas somebody can come in and say, I'm a Victorianist, or I'm a Shakespeare, or I do medieval, or I do whatever. And then you just maybe read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, and that's the extent of your Black literature experience. And I've always found that to be problematic. And so at Andrews, there was only one Black lit course that was taught every other year, Harlem Renaissance literature. And so I talked to Dr. Jones about creating a survey in the same way that we've got a survey in modern lit, a survey in literary criticism, a survey in British lit, a survey in American lit. There needs to be a survey in Black lit. And so he was like, you could do that. Or, you know, why don't you go a step higher and create an African American Studies minor? I was like, now I want to be clear, Dr. Jones is white. I was like, that's brilliant, Doc. And he became, you know, like my right hand in helping me to create that. Him and Dr. Catherine Silva, a Black woman who was teaching in the history department at the time. And so I really kind of went off on my own. I was going through the bulletins to identify the courses that already existed at the university that were centered on Blackness, whether that was, health disparities in the nursing department, or, urban ministry in the seminary, or, a survey African-American history and different things like that. And so tried to pull things together because politically, right, if you create a new program and you have to hire a series of new faculty, the university is not going to be inclined to implement that program.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that Dr. Jones and Dr. Silva advised me in that knowledge. And so that's the approach that I took. I approached it from an interdisciplinary minor that would be housed in the history department, and just started kind of pulling courses together to kind of weave this great minor. But of course, there were definitely some courses that were left out that just simply did not exist. Yeah. And so those courses needed to be created and added. So not only did I create and structure the minor, but I then also created new courses. So like Intro to African American Studies, a survey in African American literature, and then a survey in African American leadership. Yeah. And then added those to the cohort of courses as well. And then identified people on campus who would be willing to teach those courses. Wow. I got letters of approval from department heads. Like if I was using a course from the behavioral sciences department, then their chair wrote a letter saying, we are in agreement with, participating, teaching, adding this course to the program, the nursing department, history department. I got a letter from the then president of the Lake Region Conference, because he was a board trustee of the university. And so I think I had like 9 different letters from different people saying that they were in support of instituting the new curriculum. Yeah. And yeah, so this is the thing I always, I loved this part. So what I also did was I created a partnership between Andrews and Notre Dame. Okay. So people that might not know, Notre Dame University, the big Notre Dame University, is only about 30 minutes away from campus. Mm-hmm. And they actually have an African American Studies department. Mm-hmm. At the time, it was run by Dr. Hugh Page. Mm-hmm. And so I went down to Notre Dame, met with Dr. Page and several other faculty in their African American Studies department down there. And they agreed to allow Andrews this partnership where any student that participated in the African American Studies minor, they could go to Notre Dame and participate in like brown bag activities. So if they brought in like a speaker or something like that, then you could come down and you could attend that lecture. Yeah. And then, go back to campus or what have you. And so I really appreciated that move, just because, as great as it is to start something at Andrews, we really didn't have the infrastructure or the personnel to provide the kind of in-depth academic rigor around this discipline of study that a school like Notre Dame could. And so for students to have the opportunity to do that was great. Yeah. I presented that. It was accepted and implemented, but ultimately several key Black faculty left borderline like immediately after I graduated. So this was a senior project. Or a project I did my senior year. And so while it is technically on the books at the university, it is not being implemented. And I think, quite frankly, it would need a lot of work because many of the faculty and presidents and various other individuals who, said they were down just are no longer there. Like they've moved on and are in other positions. And so that partnership, like like Dr. Hugh Page is not at Notre Dame anymore, and other faculty that I spoke with are not at Notre Dame anymore. So that kind of thing, you know, definitely kind of slipped through the cracks in terms of an opportunity, unfortunately. And so, you know, my prayer is that, you know, through the leadership of Michael Nixon, who's the VP for Diversity and Inclusion, as well as others there, that they might be able to kind of pick it up, rework it, polish it off, add where there are deficits, and potentially maybe even see about recreating a partnership with Notre Dame as well.
Wow. But you were way ahead of your time because you were in undergraduate at the time, right? So
I
like
was.
a lot of us, like when I was in undergraduate, I was just like, I just want to pass. Like I was not thinking about establishing anything major. So you were like honestly like a true trailblazer. Like you saw a need and you went for it. And I think that's amazing.
Hey, I have to give credit where credit's due. Like I have to credit that to the undergraduate leadership program. And so the way that that program is set up is in order for you to complete that certificate. And I chose to actually do the minor in leadership, was the first person to complete and graduate with a minor in leadership from Andrews.
Wow.
So in order for you to get the certificate or the minor, you had to do what they called a change project. Okay. You had to identify something somewhere that you wanted to change.
Wow.
And so that's how that journey began, of me really looking to identify, man, what is it that I really want to change? And it was the belief and the support of a white male faculty member at Andrews that really saw in me that I could do more than just create a course. And
I love that.
He was right.
Yeah, I think that's what we need, allies, isn't it? Like people who empower us, people who support us. You know, I often say that, you know, for women to start voting, you needed the man, sadly, to allow her to vote. So we need white people on this journey who are going to allow us or support us or whatever. Because without it, I think it's almost impossible. I think it could be possible, but it's mostly impossible because it's a white world and a white male world, sadly. And that's what I'm always saying to my husband, use your privilege.
It's true. It's so true. And I think that if we really want change, then we really do have to figure out how we can work together and how those who have privilege and power can see those who don't and give it to them. Because I think that was the other thing, you know, Dr. Jones didn't do the project for me. Like he didn't do any of the research. He didn't do any of the writing. He really served as an advisor. And that was so empowering because it forced me to stretch my intellect. It forced me to stretch my research skills. It made me better that I had two faculty members who were literally on the side. They're like, all right, Claudia, you got to do this. All right, this looks great. You got to do this. All right, you need to think about this. You know, consider, you know, whatever it is that you're doing is going to have to go through an accreditation, right? So it's like they're forcing me to think about things and understand, you know, ways of how academia worked and functioned, but they did not do the work for me. And I think that individuals with privilege and power need to understand that when you are trying to work with someone who you feel like needs a leg up, it is not about doing charity. Justice is about empowerment. It's about partnership. And what if, instead of going into communities and just giving out goods, we actually partnered with the people in those communities and lifted them up and came alongside them and empowered them to fend for themselves and to do justice for themselves. I think that is really what's needed at all levels, whether we're going to make change, you know, at an academic institution like I did, whether we're going to make change in the street, whether we're going to make change in the church. We absolutely need to be willing to partner with people and not just do stuff for people and then like slap their name on it and say, I love you. I want you to have this. I want you to do this. I want you to,
Yeah.
nah, like let's give Black people, let's give women, let's give disenfranchised individuals the space and opportunity to really stretch and do what we know we are capable of doing.
Mm-hmm. We have the ability. We have, we're able. It's just oftentimes we don't get the privilege and the spaces to do it. It makes me think of when churches go on mission trips to the third world, and they go and they build the school or they do whatever, but oftentimes we don't empower the people, and we create this mindset of just kind of receiving handouts. And I come from Kenya, where the UN and a lot of NGOs would do a lot of work, and there's a dependency on the white man to kind of always rescue us. Even our government owes billions, and because we've been handed all this money and we're just like, we don't know how to pay. So I think empowering people because they are capable, like Africa is full of resources, just even to kind of be like, okay, here is a mine digging equipment, and then you dig yourself, yeah. And it's the same obviously with women in ministry, women in leadership as well. We're able to do it, we're capable, we just need the opportunity and for people to walk beside us. Yeah, so not sure where to go from here.
No, that's we could just keep, I can talk for days. As you were talking, the other thing that really stood out to me as well is sometimes we do mission work to pat ourselves on the back, but not so much so to, actually benefit the community. Because I went to Tanzania for a cultural study tour. So that was not ministry. But we did go to the orphanage. We did kind of participate in helping a school building project. And so, you had a bunch of college students in there, like painting the walls for what would be a school. And I always felt like this was problematic because I was like, I don't know how to paint. Like, I'm not a painter. I'm not a contractor. I'm not, like, why am I laying I am laying brick. And I always said to myself, I was like, yo, this is such a bad job. Because we actually don't know what we're doing. And so it's like, we think because I just spent like 2 full days, I'm sweating, I messed up my clothes. You are giving it everything you got. You really are. You're there and you're just like, man, I want the kids to have a school and I want them to, and so it's like, you're giving them everything you have. But it's like, in retrospect, it's like, why am I doing this? This is a bad job. If I go back to the States and somebody is like, hey, yo, we need to build a school in Baltimore. And then they call a bunch of undergraduates to come and do it. No one would be down for that. Like, everybody would say, no, that's unacceptable. And this is a bad job. And so, or, like churches that have, potentially painted schools or done various activities, and the paint job was bad. I think that's the thing, like here in the States, that's the thing that I don't like. If we're going to do things for people, then we need to do it properly. We need to do it right. I do not like going to Black people, whether that be Black persons on the continent, in the Caribbean, or here in low income neighborhoods, and saying that you'll be fine with this bad job. Because, like, you didn't have anything before, so you'll be good with this subpar gift. Like, that I feel like reinforces the dehumanization of Black people, that you are not worthy of, or that your value does not, should not produce high quality
Yeah.
mission.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, ain't nobody going to England and doing this. Ain't nobody going to Poland and Germany, building schools and having freshmen paint the walls. Like, nobody's doing that. So if we're not, if I am not on a plane to Austria next week to paint walls for white European kids, then I should not be on a plane to Tanzania to paint walls for African kids. That's just not a thing. Cut it. I'm not here for it.
Yeah. One, I knew a woman in my church in Dublin who was from Eastern Europe, and she actually paid local people. So she built a whole school, but she paid local people to do it, who were trained and skilled in it. And she spent thousands of money doing that. So there are people who think the same way that, you know, you're thinking, but I agree. I did one of those mission trips to Kenya in 2007. And I was just like, what? Like,
I remember a friend of mine that went with me on that trip. She's from Ghana, but her father is like a chancellor and, you know, different things in the country. And so like, she has this like huge mansion somewhere, like on a hill, like she's like living the life. And so when we got to Tanzania, she was very much so like, wonderful. So when are we going to the capital? You know, when are we going to go to the city to, you know, see how they do government, how they do different things, blah, 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 blah. That was not on the agenda.
Yeah.
And it's like for 20 plus days, because we were basically there for about a month, we were basically in the bush.
Wow.
And so, you know, go to see the Bantu people, the Maasai people. We went on a safari for several days. And then, you know, we had the various projects. And so it was very much so for us, like, man, I think that if there was something that we could redo in the project, particularly if it's a cultural studies tour, you would think that you would visit the capital city of a country. And at least see, you know, how business is done, you know, how legislation is done, you know, what have you. And instead of watching, you know, cheetahs and elephants. I think we did that for about 10 days. Cause I remember at least 10 days out of the trip. Cause I distinctly remember we talked about it. We talked to the organizers about it as well. And we were very much so like, this isn't bad, but not every African lives like this in this country, in villages. So yeah, I think that is something that people really need to understand and really look to, that, hey, if I'm going to either do missions or if I'm going to go to the continent and I'm going to do any kind of study, then I need to go beyond safari and the villages and things like that, and really go to where the people are and see what they're doing and how they do it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it creates a lot of misconceptions here in Europe, especially, and maybe in America as well, where white people think that Africa is just, you know, what white people who haven't traveled think that Africa is just a jungle, and they have this idea of the malnourished child with a big belly and the skinny arms. And so when I was when I was a teenager in Dublin, people would always be like, oh, you know, they would just always insinuate that, you know, I had come from that, and that, you know, that you don't have roads in Kenya, you don't have this, you don't have that. And you're like, actually, like the biggest house I've ever seen, my mom used to work for this lady and she had a mansion, like she still has a huge house, rooms that she's never entered. Like she barely goes.
Right? Rooms I've never entered. My Lord.
Fascinated that she has chefs, she has maids, she has like drivers, she has all this. I'm yet to see anybody in Ireland living that kind of life.
Mm-hmm.
Like
And to be clear for the viewership, that's a Black woman that your
that's a
mother was
Black
working
woman.
for.
Yeah, she owns
Absolutely.
hotels, owns a farm, exports
Mm-hmm.
flowers to the UK. Like, so she's, and yeah, and and my husband's like, when I took him, he was just like, whoa, like shocked, because what he had was this idea of, just how poor, the African people all go to school without shoes. I did go to school without shoes at one point, but we came up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I do think that if we're doing cultural studies and mission trips, we ought to see the whole thing, the whole picture,
Mm-hmm.
of the people. And yeah,
Yeah.
um, yeah. Go ahead.
I think that kind of education is critical to kind of dismantling um, just global racism. You've explained, the kinds of things that they're saying about the continent in Europe. We say the same thing here in the States.
Yeah,
And, I think that, if we had curriculum and courses,
yeah,
within our universities, if we were really teaching about Africa properly, in our elementary schools and our high schools and our colleges, if we were teaching about the Caribbean properly, and we were teaching about Black America properly, then I just feel like white people wouldn't hold the same disparaging ideas. And
yeah,
if the same way that, they can take tours to Spain and
yeah,
Germany and Austria and all these places to learn and grow, and we really began to see Lagos, Nigeria as a hub that you need to go
yeah,
see and study and spend
yeah,
some time,
yeah,
to see Johannesburg, South Africa as, places on the continent
yeah,
where, no, you need to go to this country to
yeah,
learn
yeah, yeah,
and to understand. In the same way that we treat European countries, I
yeah,
really think that on a global scale, we
yeah.
could really eradicate a lot of the damaging ideology that is associated with Black and brown bodies.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. So speaking of Black and brown bodies, I don't think we should end this without talking about police brutality and um, you know, that, because I feel like I've always been wanting to talk about racism and issues surrounding Black people, but it wasn't until the death of George Floyd that I was like, I must do it now. It was like,
Mm.
and I feel like there has been an awakening of Black voices and even white voices, at least over here, who are just like, this cannot continue, and people are being more vocal about the racism, horrible things that have happened to them, even here.
Yeah.
Physical abuse and sexual abuse and just horrible things that have been happening to Black and brown people. So I just wanted to touch on that, and I know that you're passionate about that.
Yeah, police brutality, I truly believe, is just our contemporary version of lynching.
Wow.
Between I'd say 1865 and probably 1940, probably a little bit longer, but just to be safe, white people would just grab any Black person they wanted to and hang them from a tree.
Mm.
They Lynchings took place in the North, lynchings took place in the South.
Yeah.
It was not this exclusively Mississippi, Georgia activity. One of the most horrific lynchings took place in Indiana.
Wow.
And so what would happen is if a Black man if he looked at a white woman, they might say, oh, he raped her, lynched.
Yeah.
If a Black man was allegedly convicted of some kind of a crime and he was thrown in jail, a white mob would come, take him out of the jail cell, hang him from a tree.
Mm.
But it also was not even just hangings. People were tarred and feathered. People were burned. People were hanging from trees and then covered in gasoline
Mm.
and lit on fire. Men were hung from trees and castrated.
Mm.
Women were lynched. Pregnant women were lynched.
Oh.
People would hang pregnant Black women and cut the babies out of their womb while they were hanging. Um, so there's a long history of mutilation and excessive violence against Black people in this country. When you add to the fact that what ended up happening is during slavery, there were what were called slave patrols and slave catchers, individuals who were, your sole job was to go find runaways and bring them back to plantations. Once African slaves were emancipated, people would then, or these individuals, these slave patrols, these slave catchers were turned into sheriffs.
Wow.
So that the history of policing in America is directly attached to slave patrols.
I didn't know that.
And so people do not know that. And so what we're seeing in police, you know, people say, well, police aren't trained to like catch Black people. And they might not be. I mean, I've talked to enough police commissioners or active police who talk about what it's like to go through the academy, and there is no treat Black people this way, treat white people this way. But I think that what people oftentimes don't realize is that when you have a shady history like that in your initiation, there is going to be racial residue that shows up. And I think that there are a myriad of reasons why police brutality exists, at least police brutality, particularly against Black bodies. You know, there's a lot of misconceptions due to a variety of laws like the 1994 crime bill or Richard Nixon's push in the 1970s for the war on drugs, right? So that there now is this idea that Black people are engaging in illicit drug dealing. And in order for us to bear down on drug sales and drug use and crime affiliated with drugs and violence, then we need to jail all of these kind of Black criminals, right? So that, but quite frankly, the criminality and the notion that Black people are inherently criminals has been something that has been in the psyche of whiteness from the inception of this country, but particularly intensified, you know, after emancipation. And so from the late 1860s, this country has had this view of Black people as being inherently criminal. So that when you have an individual now in the 1990s that's selling marijuana, I'm going to approach this individual with violence. When you have an individual like Eric Garner in June of 2014, who was selling loose cigarettes in New York. He was standing outside of a bodega selling loose cigarettes. Now, the history behind that is that a lot of people in New York sell loose cigarettes because the cigarette in a pack of cigarettes in New York, because of the taxes, can cost up to like $13. Whereas you can go to Michigan and buy a pack of cigarettes for like $4. So what people would do is they would buy packs of cigarettes in cheaper, low tax states, and then they would sell loosies, what they call loosies, or loose cigarettes for 75 cents, 25 cents, what have you, out in the community. Eric Garner is standing out there selling loosies, and 5 police officers jump him, put him into a chokehold, bear him to the ground, and basically choke him until he dies. For loose cigarettes? George Floyd had a knee in his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds because of because of an alleged counterfeit $20 bill. Like, I think that and then what happens after that, right, then becomes the media smear campaign of so-and-so George Floyd had heroin in his system when he died. He was a criminal. He was behind on child support payments. He was convicted of several other felons prior to this, right? So it becomes, okay, now we need to create the narrative for why him dying is acceptable.
Right.
And that is what makes police brutality such a critical issue here in the States, because it is rooted in racial profiling. It's rooted in the idea that Blackness is inherently criminal. And it's expressing itself by way of individuals who have been called to protect and serve, are actively executing Black bodies on the street for non-violent offenses. Not one victim of police brutality was a murderer, serial killer, participating in a mass shooting. We're talking about individuals with drug paraphernalia on them, individuals who maybe actually were completely innocent and unarmed and were simply running because I don't trust the cops. Or maybe if we want to talk about Botham Jean in Texas, who was shot by a police officer in his house on his couch eating ice cream. And of course I have to end talking about Breonna Taylor, who was shot sleeping in her bed. And finally off, absolutely, finally off from fighting COVID-19 on the front lines as an EMT worker. 26-year-old woman finally getting some rest, and you bust in my house at 12 after 12 midnight and shoot me dead. And just like you said, none of the officers have been arrested yet. And so it is critical that we really come to the place where we defund the police. And when people talk about defunding the police, what they're talking about is millions of dollars are given to police departments, and police have to do everything from domestic violence checks to traffic stops to drug calls to murders. They have a lot on their plate that they, quite frankly, are not trained to do. And so when we talk about defunding the police, we're talking about taking some of these funds away from riot gear, away from having personnel answer calls that they are not equipped for, and putting that money back into education, right? When we defund the police, we can get the police out of the education system. There are schools that have more police officers in their buildings with absolutely no nurse, no school counselor, no guidance counselor, and underqualified teachers. How is it that you're okay with having schools that have plenty of officers and have no social workers, no nurses, no mental health providers? I think that if we begin to actually put our money in our communities to the things that matter, like our social workers, like education, like medical and mental health care providers, at that point, you're rehabilitating the people. And if I make people better, I can then at that point reduce a lot of crime, right? Crime happens within proximity, and it also happens because of lack of employment, because of lack of opportunity, because of mental health. Right? So if you got a whole bunch of poor people with absolutely no means or way of making an income, and then on top of that, they're using and abusing drugs and other substances. And then on top of that, they're basically living in a constant state of trauma, right? Because you're seeing death nonstop. You are living in abject poverty. And then you add on top of that mental health. I just think that if Black people, if things were reversed and these Black communities were filled with white people,
Yeah.
we would see this as a public health crisis.
Yeah.
We would see this as something that immediately needed funding and support to build the people up. But again, when you have a country that looks at Black bodies and sees us not as human, not as being capable of being brought to a better station in life, then why would I invest in your education? Why would I invest in the businesses in your community? Why would I invest in you getting mental health or physical health? Why would I make sure that you have a grocery store in your community instead of you having to catch 4 buses 20, 30 minutes away so that you can get produce? And then you can only carry 2 bags of groceries on the bus. That's if you go. No, I'm going to go down to the 7-Eleven. I'm going to grab a Pepsi and a honey bun, and I'm going to call it a day. So you've got people that are on sugar. They have diabetes, they've got mental health problems, they're on drugs and various alcohols. Like, you see them, it's like, it's nothing but an incubator for problems. And rather than looking at Black people and saying, you are inherently criminal, you are inherently ignorant, you are incapable of rising to a better station in life, why not look at the various factors within their environment that are actively keeping them from being able to excel? If I am a child and all I eat is honey buns, pasta, Kraft mac and cheese, and some kind of Hawaiian punch, what makes you think that I'm going to do well in school? If you think it's good and important and critical that your white kids get protein and vegetables and fruit and water, so their brain, clean water
that's not poisoned with lead.
Right. Correct. Water without lead in it, right? If you think that's critical for your kids and you can see and know and understand that that's necessary in order for them to thrive cognitively, then how can you look at the diet of Blacks in these low income neighborhoods, Black Americans in abject poverty, and then say, oh, well, I don't know why they're failing their classes. Oh, I don't know why so-and-so can't sit still. So-and-so's kid is bad because all he does is run around all day and he can't listen and focus. If I hadn't had a good meal in a few years, I wouldn't be able to sit and focus either in your class. And so I think that police brutality and really the income inequality, the education inequality, and the systematic oppression that is happening in our predominantly Black neighborhoods that were created by redlining, ultimately reveals that America has a very real current and contemporary racism problem. And they are merely exercising and expressing contemporary lynching. That's all police brutality is. That's lynching, mass incarceration, lynching and slavery both currently still exist in my country. They simply exist by way of police brutality and mass incarceration. And redlining and the lack of educational resources, healthcare resources, and nutritional resources literally serve as a means to ensure that those are your only options. That you will leave this country 6 feet in the ground or in a cell. And that I find to be unacceptable. And that I feel like is God himself is looking down on the earth. And just like he says to the prophet Isaiah in Isaiah 58, he says, I look down and I see injustice in the streets and nobody cries out. I just feel like right now God is looking down. He sees bodies laying in the street. He sees injustice in the street and nobody is crying out. And that's all I'm trying to do is cry out.
And there's a terminology that is used. I try not to kind of advocate any one denomination on this, but there's a terminology in Adventism that is called present truth. And it's this kind of revelation of, you know, I guess, something that's important in your theology and to God at a present age at that particular time. And I am convinced that justice and justice for Black lives and brown bodies is the present truth for this generation.
Wow.
And,
Yeah.
you know, we're too busy talking about, you know, which day is the Sabbath and, well, you know, what's this, what's that, and whatever, but we're neglecting the important things, which are justice and mercy. And how can you say that you
Yeah.
are walking humbly with your God when when the phrase Black Lives Matter annoys you for no reason, or when you say that, you know, Black people are dying from COVID because, well, they don't eat healthy, but you're not looking at the bigger picture of why they don't eat healthy or the systemic racism. I think I agree with you that God is looking down and he is not impressed. And he cries. I believe that he cries. And but I look forward to, like, I don't know, just freedom, complete freedom. I look forward to complete equity and equality.
Sure.
I look forward to just a world where everybody is treated as human, with the same respect, you know, where Black people are equal to white people and other people of color as well. This has been so amazing. I have learned so much. I have wanted to cry, but I can't. I stayed strong. But the passion with which you speak, like, it's so, like, you can tell you're not just doing this for the sake of doing it. Like, you mean everything about it. You've researched it, you've studied it, you've probably lived some of this, and I honor you for that, and I respect you for that. And I'm so glad to know, even if from afar, somebody who is such a trailblazer and who is doing such good work of raising awareness and kind of trying to bring Black voices together. You know, I love the way you were like, I'm not gonna, you know, put one against the other, because the African experience is the same. It looks a bit different, but it's the same. Is there anything you would like to say to our white listeners today?
The first thing maybe I'd like to say is thank you for listening. You know, thank you for staying for such a conversation. I know it more than likely may have made you uncomfortable at certain parts and points. But after that, I think that, you know, the request that I would have is Google books, Google history, Google truth, to understand that the narrative that you have been given about Black people is not true. And you have been given a lie, and your identity and the life that you live right now is literally built on a lie. Therefore, it is a house of cards that quite literally depends on the mercy of Black bodies. Because the moment that Black people cease fighting for equality and start wanting revenge, you're going to be in a much different situation. And so I think the plea that I have is that white people actually change their hearts and minds and do the intellectual work necessary to come to new knowledge, so that we don't have to keep losing life, continuing to provoke the anger of my people, and quite frankly, continuing to provoke the anger of God. Thomas Jefferson, he, in the draft of the Declaration of Independence, closed with that slavery would be the thing that God would judge America on.
Mm.
Of course, the founding fathers decided to remove that in the draft. So it's like, oh, I hear you, but let's go ahead and take that one out. Let's go ahead.
I don't
No, thank you. And so I truly believe that. And I think that God is giving the church, and he's giving our nation an opportunity to restructure, to revamp, to rethink, to reimagine, to re-narrate, so that we can get it right. And I do believe that in not getting it right, you put yourself in a position to where at some point you will receive the wrath of God concerning the oppression, the global oppression of Black and brown bodies. So my plea is for white people to get it right.
And what would you say to Black people? These are two questions I always end with before we pray.
To Black people, I would say stay strong. To Black people, I would say do not become what you are seeking to dismantle.
Yeah.
Do not envy what you are seeking to distribute, but instead to stay grounded and to understand that we are fighting for a human right, and that God is on our side. My hoodie says God is woke.
Yeah, yay. I was wondering that.
Yeah, my hoodie says God is woke.
Okay.
And so if I could encourage, any Black listener that's listening in any country, understand that God is on the side of the oppressed.
Yeah.
And that whatever fight you are in, whether you are fighting femicide in South Africa, you're fighting police brutality in the States, whether you are fighting belonging and representation right there in Ireland, whatever you are fighting in this global racial fight, know that God is on your side. So stay strong, and do not envy what you seek to dismantle.
I love that. I love that. If you would like, please follow Claudia, subscribe to her YouTube channel. She has a lot of sermons and just conversations on race and God and Bible and all sorts of things. I don't know if you're on Instagram.
Yes.
Claudia M. Allen as well, or?
Absolutely. Yeah. You can find me on Instagram at CAMAAL365. But if you just type my name in, it should come up too. So yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, let us pray. God, I want to thank you because you are the God of everybody, the God of Black people and white people and Asian people and every other color in between. And I just want to praise you because you don't play favorites. However, we do know that you are close to the brokenhearted and you love justice and you love mercy. And we seek your justice and your mercy. And we ask that we can walk humbly with you. I just thank you for the work that Claudia is doing. I pray for your blessing over her, for an extra portion of the Holy Spirit. And I pray that you'll bless her in every way that she needs blessing. And I know that you have blessed her already. Psalms 34 verse 10 says that the lions will grow weak and hungry, but those who seek the Lord will never lack any good thing. So God, we seek you and we hold on to every single one of your promises. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was truly a pleasure. This was a fantastic conversation. I'm so grateful to have virtually visited Ireland. Yay! I love it.
And you can come visit anytime.
I would love to. Thank you so much, love.
Thank you.